Welcome to everybody just joining us now. We're going to begin just in a moment. I'm just letting everybody in from the waiting room now, and we'll get started really shortly. Oh, good evening from Portugal. That is so cool. We have a note. We have a note, Bill, saying that we have a viewer from Portugal.
Oh, wow. All
right, so while we're getting everybody in from the waiting room, oh, hello. While we're getting everybody in from the waiting room, I'll just give my little talk and then I'll hand it over to Bill. So I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today for a virtual talk. Please, if I could remind you to keep yourselves muted throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and our speaker, Bill, will be happy to address any comments or questions at the end of the program. If you are joining us over Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. Our Facebook audience can also ask questions using their comment section on Facebook, and we'll also be monitoring those comments and answering them at the end of the program as well. Please note that this talk is being recorded and streamed live, and will be posted to our social media channels once the talk is over. If you would like to rewatch this talk or other previous virtual tours and talks, please make sure you check out our YouTube and our Facebook pages. With that, I'm super excited to introduce our speaker, Bill, to you. His talk today is entitled Russian Icons at the Timken. So thank you so much, Bill, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I had thought of giving this particular presentation to bear in mind what it is we're looking at and parts of what to look for, and to explain a little bit about what we are seeing in these icons. Now, the word icon, of course, comes from Greek. And in Greek, the word means image or likeness. And in Greek, at least metaphorically, the word means living image. This has particular relevance to icons. And the reference is made to chapter 4, 2 Corinthians, where the statement is made about Jesus Christ, who is the image of God. And in the Greek Bible, the word that's used for image, of course, is the word that icon comes from. Now, in churches of the Eastern Rites, the icon is a venerated representation of Christ, his mother. Notice his mother. I'll explain that in a minute, why we're stressing his mother, or other religious subject done in the Byzantine manner. The typical icon is a small tempera painting on panel. And you can see from the slide that's on the screen right now, some of the icons at the Timken are pretty small. The forms are stylized, and the positions of characters are prescribed and strictly regulated by the church. And these icons are directly linked with the liturgy, the church, and the sacraments. We're fortunate to have these icons because Italian art was, 14th century Italian art was still influenced by the rigidly stylized Byzantine art. But Italian artists began to find inspiration in nature and logically constructed space, real light, and human emotion. Although later on we're going to mention icons do not just totally ignore emotion. We'll mention that a little bit later, and if I forget it, bring it up. Slide. Now, this is not one of ours. I'm only using this because it's just easier to explain some of the things I want to show. Now, this is a modern icon, but notice it has writing on it. And I have to be very careful not to say all icons are like this, but the vast majority of them tell you what you're looking at. And what we have here is Greek. And if the words have that swing dash above, that means that they are abbreviations. And if it doesn't, it's just the word. So we're looking at the Holy Family. And up at the top, upper right, there's some Greek writing. And what it says is Saint Joseph. On the upper left, notice they have the swing dash. That means those are abbreviations. And it looks like MP, but that's actually, it's mu ro. It's the first and last letters of the Greek word for mother. Remember, we talked about representations of Christ, his mother, because she's always identified as his mother. And so that's the abbreviation, mitir, mother. And then you can see the second one. What's that? So, well, that's Greek too. That's the problem is it's old church Slavonic, but anyway, that's theta upsilon, first and last letters of the Greek genitive for the word for God, Theou, mitir Theou, mother of God. She's always referred to that way. She's not ever referred to any other way. She's not called Mary in these icons. So you're going to see mitir Theou now in the museum. The mitir Theou, it's not going to be obvious in these slides, but it's also not very obvious in the museum. Sometimes it's very, very small. And then we see Jesus. And if you'll notice on the left shoulder of Saint Joseph, there are two more abbreviations. And it's hard to see what it is, but it looks like ICXC. But what looks like a C actually is a Greek called the lunar sigma. And it's used, among other things, in religious representations. Of course, that's the first and last letter of Jesus Christ in Greek. It identifies Jesus. So we're going to look for that in some of the slides we see later. Then there's a halo. The halo has writing on it, and there are no swung dashes. So that means that those are words in Greek. And here's where it gets interesting, at least for a person like me. It says on. In other words, the letter at the top, it looks like a letter O. Well, that's O. In other words, the Greek word for the, at least the masculine. And then on, I think it looks like a W. That's omega. And so that's two words, on. And the interesting thing about it is in the Greek Bible, you may recall that in the book of Exodus, God is giving Moses his marching orders. And Moses said, hey, wait a minute. What if they want to know what your name is? And the Hebrew Bible says, I am who I am. But the Greek version, the Greek Bible says, I am on. On is the active present participle of the verb to be, and it means the being. So there is Jesus identified by his name, Jesus Christ, but his halo says what God said in Greek to Moses when Moses wanted to know what his name was. On, the being. And one more thing about this particular slide, notice what Mary is wearing. She has this cloak, veil, whatever. The color, I would call it maroon. None of the sources all say it's red, purple. But we want to notice there are three, what are they? I've seen them called rosettes, but there are these three star-like things or whatever they are. One's over her head, that is one on each shoulder. Those represent Mary's virginity. Prenatal, in partu, and postpartum. In other words, she's Mary, ever virgin. So we're going to look and see if we keep seeing these abbreviations. In other words, Mother of God, Jesus Christ, OON, and those three rosettes I've seen them called. And so we'll go to the next slide. Oh, now this is sort of an icon-like thing. The only reason for showing it is, let's see, did we get what we said we were looking for? I see the meteor, and then it says OY. It says, oh my goodness, these people didn't even have access to a Greek alphabet, so they just put the closest thing they could think of. Notice for the rosettes, of which there are three, you can only see two of them, but you know, the other one's just behind Jesus. And we see the thing, it looks like ICXC, remembering what that really is. It's Jesus, the abbreviation of Jesus Christ. And then they've got WH, that's the on part. The only reason I show this is that, for example, in the Episcopal Cathedral, St. Paul's downtown, there's an icon-like representation of Our Lady of Walsingham. And it's like this. In other words, they didn't have the Greek, so they just put the closest thing they could think of. Slide, please. Okay, let's get started. Now, in the churches of the Eastern Rites, there is a sanctuary screen that separates the sanctuary from the rest of the church. Well, it is going to have doors. I mean, after all, some of the priest has to go through these doors. And these are the royal doors, and they're placed on the sanctuary screen. Now, the sanctuary screen, the word for it in English anyway, it sounds funny, but the word, the way it's pronounced in English is iconostasis. So I know this sounds like something Ogden Nash would have come up with, because he said the rhinoceros is preposterous. So this is the iconostasis, and the royal doors are right in the middle of it. Now, in the Timken, when the Timken opens again, one wall is arranged as if it were the sanctuary screen, and that's where the royal gates or the royal doors are going to be. Now, these central doors in the iconostasis, they're called the royal doors, and they lead into the sanctuary. There are two side doors for the deacons to use. Now, these doors are sacred, and they're kept closed, except when the priest opens them to enter the sanctuary. Now, the wings of the doors, this is a typical one. Not all of them are like this, but this particular one is a typical one. In the upper part, we have the Annunciation. And there's the Mother of God on the right, and the Archangel Gabriel on the left. Now, as I said before, are the abbreviations for Mother of God there? The answer is yes. And so, well, I don't see them. Well, oddly enough, even on the real gates in the museum, they're very hard to see, but it's there. It's very, very small, but it is there. Now, who are the other people here? This is not all royal gates are like this, but this is a typical one. So, well, what does it show? Well, it shows the evangelists, starting at the upper right, Matthew, and then under that, Mark, and then going to the left, Luke and John. So how do you know who they are? Well, you can't see it on here, and it's even hard to see on the doors themselves, but it's written on there telling you who they are. So that's starting at the upper right and going clockwise, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So these are found. The doors will be on the wall, and the icons around it are arranged as they would be on the sanctuary screen in a church of the Eastern Rites. Slide, please. Now, this is not one of ours. This is simply, again, one of those to show an example. Now, right above the doors on the sanctuary screen is the thing that there's a tier of images called it says at the top, deises. And you see that says E. That thing, it looks like an H, is really the article, feminine article in Greek. The deises means supplication. And in its simplest form, it will look like this. In other words, Jesus enthroned in the middle, and we see what we expect to see. You see the on in the halo, you see the ICXC, Jesus Christ, and then on his right, we have what we expect to see. We see Mary with that maphorion is what that garment is called, that purpley colored, red purple color. We see the MP, the meterotheu, and then on the other side, we see this person wearing fur. Well, we know who that is. That's John the Baptist. And it says so. You say, well, what? I don't see that. Well, at the upper right, there's writing. Notice the swing dash that's tell you that you're looking at abbreviations. And it says St. John. And if you know anything about the Greek alphabet, you're going to say, well, if that's John the Baptist, I don't see anything that indicates that. And the answer is, well, the thing is, in the Eastern rites, that's not what he's called. He's called the forerunner. And what you're looking at is the Greek abbreviation of the Greek word for forerunner. Now, this is the simplest form. However, in the museum, above the doors, and you're going to see it on the wall that represents the sanctuary screen, you're going to see something a little bit different. This is the simplest way to display it, but there are other ways. In other words, the main supplicants are the Mother of God and John the Baptist, but there are others. And in the deices tier, you will have others, and they're arranged hierarchically, if you want to call it that. In other words, you'll find, and this is that way in the museum. In other words, you're going to find the archangels Gabriel and Michael, St. Peter and St. Paul. But as I say, this is the simplest way for the deices to be represented. It's called trimorphion is the Greek word for this, and just the three. However, and the Timken is different. Slide, please. Now, in the museum, right above the doors, this is what we have. The Savior enthroned, tempera on panel. Now, does anyone, I hope you can see, what do we look for when we see a representation of Jesus? We expect to see the monogram of the ICXC. Does everyone see it? It's hard to see, but it's there. It's right beside, on either side of his head. I'm going to stop messing with the screen. But anyway, this is the way it is in the museum, with Jesus in the middle, the way it was right before. And then on either side of him, there will be icons of the Mother of God, John the Baptist, and then Gabriel, Michael, St. Peter, St. Paul. That's the way it is in the museum. The deices tier right above the doors, and that's what you're going to see. Now we're going to go to something completely different. We've covered the royal doors on the sanctuary screen and the deices tier above it. And that's the way it's depicted on that wall, or will be when the museum reopens. Now we're going to go to something a little different. This thing is called a slide. This is called a tabletka, and it shows two different things. One is biblical, one isn't. And so what are we looking at? Well, the 40 martyrs of Sebaste, and then 4 men in the fiery furnace. We'll do the 40 martyrs first. This episode was brought up initially in the 4th century by Bishop Basil, and it has to do with the 12th Roman legion called Fulminata, which has to do with the bolt of lightning. And he said, what's going on here? Well, 40 legionnaires of the 12th Roman Legion in Sebaste, which was in Lesser Armenia then, it's in Turkey now, they declared that they were Christians. And as punishment, they were forced to disrobe and stand on a frozen lake in a bitter cold night till they froze to death. And that's what that's about. They're standing on a frozen lake. But the question then comes, is anything happening other than these people standing there? He said, well, I don't know. What do you mean, is anything happening? He said, well, in the upper right, there seems to be sort of a building and somebody seems to be going into it. And so what happened was in the Legion, these people, all right, you 40 guys, you say you're Christians, all right, we don't allow that. You go stand on the ice until you freeze to death. But anybody changes his mind, you can leave the scene, get off the lake, and go get in a hot bath. And as you see that there's somebody entering that door, and that's where he's headed. According to legend, when the guy got in the hot bath, he had a stroke and died. But anyway, one of the 40 leaves, and yet in the lower left, somebody's joining the group. In other words, the guard, or one of the guards, was so impressed by this whole thing, he decided that he would make up the one that left, he would take his place. And he's even been given a name. As a matter of fact, all 40, I don't, it's like the 3 kings, you know, and the 3 kings and the Bible, it does, first of all, it doesn't say 3 kings. It doesn't say they were kings, and it doesn't give them names. The only reason there are 3 of them is because there were 3 gifts, but they were given names. And so these 40 martyrs, they're called the Holy 40. And they are, but anyway, that's what that's all about. And that's a question of hypothermia. Hypothermia, in other words, they're standing there until they die of cold. But then on the right, we have this story this is biblical. This is from the book of Daniel. And it says the 4 men in the fiery furnace. I said, okay, let's have a look. My goodness. Icons I have tried my best to see what that says at the top. You see there's writing at the top of that 4 men, but I can't figure out what it is. I gave up. But anyway, icons tend to be like this. They want to get everything into the picture. They say, what do you mean everything? Well, Nebuchadnezzar, see, he's seated there at the right. Nebuchadnezzar erected a statue that was 60 cubits high. You say, cubits? What's a cubit? So, well, that's a 1.5 feet. So that thing was 90 feet high, a gold statue. And he proclaimed that everybody at the sound of music would have to bow down to it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon, and he had brought Hebrews there from the Holy Land to be trained in administration, and that was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, those were Babylonian names. Their Hebrew names, it's sort of are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But if you look at and so Nebuchadnezzar said, anybody that doesn't bow down gets thrown into a fiery furnace. And so these guys, these 3, Shadrach, I don't know if anyone's my age, but back in the 20th century, there was a popular song Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. That's all I remember about it. But there was a song back then. So there they are. Now that says 4 men, but what do you actually see? Well, there are 3 people with some kind of a red cap, edged in white, and then there's an angel, but that's the 4. So Nebuchadnezzar provided that for them that wouldn't bow down to that statue when they heard the music. They were going to be thrown in the fiery furnace, heated 7 times as hot as usual. And these people in the foreground, the strong men who were supposed to throw them in that fire, the heat was so intense it killed them. There they are. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had said, "Our God," watch what I'm saying, "our God can save us. But even if he doesn't, we're not bowing down to that statue." And so anyway, Nebuchadnezzar is surprised, heated the furnace 7 times hotter than normal, killed the people who threw him in there. And then Nebuchadnezzar looks, and there are these 4 people in there. One's an angel, and the other 3 identified by those red hats. They're Hebrews. Now, I don't have the slide in this presentation, but there is a rather large icon in the Timken showing the Last Judgment. And there are people in one of the tiers in that big icon wearing those red hats trimmed in white. And then in the icon world, that tells you that they are Hebrews or whatever thing we're there. So also in the Bible, it says when they came out of the fire, and they were forgiven, said their clothes weren't singed and they didn't smell like smoke. Rather interesting story. So that's the story of the 4 men in the fiery furnace, taken from the book of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So this tabletka, notice how small it is. It's not much bigger than a 3-ring notebook. And we said, a lot of these icons are small, but the tabletka, it's a double-sided thing. The 40 martyrs who were to die of cold, and the 3 men who were supposed to have been burned up in the furnace, but they weren't touched at all. Their clothes weren't singed, and they didn't smell like smoke. Slide. Now, here's something completely different. Now, this one is the ascension. And in this particular case, you say, well, I don't know. You say, what do we see? You can actually see it if you look right above Mary. Mary's right in the center. It's hard to see on the slide. It's hard to see on the icon too, but that icon of Mother of God, it's there. It's in red. It's really hard to see. But what are we looking at? Okay, now this icon, notice the size. It's not really very big. Moscow School. This is the ascension. And this ascensions, in other words, remember, icons, the iconography, in other words, the way the figures are arranged and everything, are established and maintained for centuries. And this is one scheme that is permanent. So that's not the word. What am I trying to say? In other words, if you see the ascension, it's always going to look like that. You say, what do you see? Well, Mary is at the very center of the composition, and she is surrounded by the apostles. She is the pillar and foundation of the church and the axis linking the earth to heaven, where Christ sits enthroned among angelic powers. As you can see, this is the ascension. However, in this one, the writing at the top is in Russian. And it says in Russian, simply, the ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ. So notice this is it's affixed. You see, The iconography, a lot of these icons, once you see one, you've seen them all. And in this case, it's pretty well established, remembering of why it's arranged the way it is and what it means. Remember, Mary is in the center of the composition because she is the pillar and foundation of the church, the axis linking earth with heaven, where Christ sits enthroned among angelic powers, the ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ. Slide. This doesn't happen to be ours, but ours looks just like it. Of course, ours looks just like it because the iconography is set. And you have these three lines coming down that represent the Trinity. So what are we looking at? This is the Transfiguration. The Savior's Transfiguration. So, oh my goodness. What is that? It's been described as a proleptic glimpse of the second coming. Oh, thank you. Now I understand. Well, proleptic means anticipatory, but it has these three lines and these wedge-shaped things. In other words, what I'm trying to say is when you see the Transfiguration, when Jesus took Peter, James, and now our icon, which looks just like this, has the names of the people who are in it. This one doesn't. But anyway, who are we seeing here? Well, Jesus on a mountain, flanked by Moses and Elijah, and he took Peter, James, and John with him. And this is the Transfiguration. And it's mentioned in the Synoptic Gospels, which means Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's not mentioned in John. And Christ appears radiantly transformed. And this represents the fulfillment of the kingdom of God coming to power in Jesus. But again, they all look alike with these peculiar wedge-shaped things, and he's in this sort of nimbus. That is the Transfiguration. It's not a very large icon. Slide. Oh, golly, what's this? Mary, three-handed, 16th century tempera on wood panel, dimensions unknown. Well, it's not very big. But anyway, oh my, well, do we see what we expect to see? I see the Mother of God at the top, the upper left and upper right. I see the Jesus Christ. I see the on and the halo. And yet there are three hands. Now, the short and simple version of it is this has to do with St. John of Damascus, who, in gratitude for being cured, hung a silver right hand on an icon, and in time it came to be represented in this way. In other words, that is the arm of St. John Damascene. I said, what? I don't get it. What do you mean? And so the longer story, let's say, is around in the 8th century, the Byzantine Emperor Leo III has banned icons, the iconoclasts. John, this is John of Damascus, John Damascene, writes treatises in defense of the veneration of icons. And these come to the ears of the emperor, and he doesn't like it. So he couldn't actually get to John directly. So he has a letter forged in John's handwriting and sends it to the caliph in Damascus. And of course, the caliph is incensed at this disloyalty of his servant, because then, when the Muslims began to expand, they used local people for the administration. And so anyway, the Umayyad Caliph in Damascus has John's right hand amputated as punishment. And the hand is displayed publicly. John begs it back. And then John places the hand in front of the icon of the Mother of God. This is the Madonna Hodogitria. We'll explain the iconography of that next. But anyway, he places it before that, and he thanks the Mother of God, and he then in the morning, she appears to him in a dream, and his hand is restored. He wakes up, finds his hand restored, spends the rest of the night singing thanks to the Mother of God in the icon, and he hangs a silver hand on it. And so then he goes to the caliph. The caliph sees, well, he must have been innocent because his hand's been restored. And John begs permission, as he put it, to take another path to follow him who said, I am the way. I am the way. This is a Madonna Hodogitria. I am the way. And we'll explain this about the way thing, but it's appropriate for that particular icon, that particular representation of the Mother of God. And so then he goes off to Jerusalem to venerate the holy places, and then goes out to the desert, and wherein becomes a monk. So theoretically, he wasn't St. John Damascene when that happened. But anyway, that's the long version of what that represents. Remember, that is the hand of St. John Damascene. It was originally hung, a silver arm, like a votive offering, was hung on this representation. The Madonna is called the Madonna Hodogitria. And so that's what that's all about. Slide. Slide. Here, by the way, this has gotten out of order somehow. Anyway, now that we're talking about the Madonna Hodogitria, legend had it that in other words, when I first started in the museum, it was called the Jerusalem Mother of God, the Madonna Hodogitria, which I hope is the next slide. Anyway, this is by Il Guercino. The Timken has a Guercino. It's a return of the prodigal son. But it was accepted that St. Luke had painted the original of the Madonna Hodogitria. And here he is in a painting by Il Guercino doing that. Now, this is not an icon, but this is Western religious art, not Eastern. But there is an indication there of that's St. Luke. And we might mention while we're at it that everyone knows of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Now that's Our Lady of Guadalupe. There's one in Mexico, but there's one, the original Our Lady of Guadalupe is in Spain. And in Spain, an image was found. It had been hidden by priests to keep the Moors from getting it when the Muslim invasion. And it was given by Pope Gregory to San Leandro, St. Leander, and Bishop of Toledo. But legend had it that image was sculpted by none other than St. Luke himself. However, this painting by Il Guercino, there is an indication there that that's St. Luke. Now, this is not like an icon where it'll identify him in writing, usually. What identifies St. Luke here is the ox. See the ox off there to the right. And so here we have this painting that was originally done. In other words, the first icon was the Madonna Hodogitria by St. Luke. Slide, please. Oops, we're missing something. Oh God, it's one missing. Can I see the slide after this one? Oops, okay. Back up one more. There it is. I don't know. All right. Moscow School, and now notice it's called Georgian Mother of God. Now this business about being Georgian is used to explain why it's such a large icon. Notice it's pretty big, 51 by 42 inches. This is called the Madonna Hodogitria, and it has all the things that we had come to look for. Notice it has the monograms at the top of Mother of God. It has above Jesus's head. It has, it's hard to read, even in the real one, even though it's big, it's hard to read, but it says, that IC, what was like ICXC, and it's got the thing in the halo. Now, Hodogitria, Madonna Hodogitria means, the Hodogitria in modern Greek, Hodogitria means a conductress. I'm not sure that's what the Greek English, modern Greek English dictionary says. But in the icon world, what that means is the Madonna Hodogitria is she who points to the way. See, she's pointing at Jesus. And Jesus said, I am the way and the life. So that's the Madonna Hodogitria. And it's, as I said, as I say now, it's called the Georgian, although originally it was called something else. And notice that she is wearing the maphorion. We can see those rosettes as we expected. So it has everything that we expect to see. And it shows the Madonna pointing to him. So that's the Madonna Hodogitria. And when the one that we saw with the three hands was turned around the other way. Now, here's an interesting thing about these Madonnas. And I read this, and there are about 16 ways in which the Mother of God can be depicted in the icon world, but there's one history of icons that says that it's either the Madonna Hodogitria, as we're looking at here, and the other one. Can we now go down to the, let's go down until we get to the, that one. In other words, I read that the Madonna Hodogitria and then this kind are the two Russian kinds. Anything else is made somewhere else. Okay, what are we looking at? This is Our Lady of Korsun. Oh, by the way, speaking of, anybody know where Korsun is? That's in the Ukraine. That is in the Ukraine. However, okay, now, do we see what we expect to see? I see the Mother of God up at the top. I hope everyone sees it. We have the thing, the IC, the abbreviation of Jesus Christ. And we can't see the whole halo, but some of it's there. And the rosettes are there, at least the ones that we can see. And this is also known, and this kind of thing is known as the Virgin of the Sweet Kiss. And it is a cropped version of another kind, is Our Lady of Tenderness. But anyway, this one is, of all the icons that we've seen, there's a thing about this one that makes it Russian, as opposed to how it's in other countries that are of the Eastern Rite, and that is you see both of Mary's hands. You see both of her hands holding Jesus. That's what you're looking at. It's Russian, both hands, because the other ones don't only show one hand. This is a sort of a modification in a way. But remember, we were talking earlier about the fact that the Renaissance painters wanted to get more emotion, and that's what this kind of thing does. In other words, it expresses the intensity of the loving relationship between mother and child, which is not so obvious, let's say, in the typical Madonna Hodogitria, where they're not this close together. Our Lady of Korsun, remember that this happens to be, of course, is in Ukraine. Slide. This is the last one in the presentation, and it represents, say, well, who's that? It says at the top, it's very, very hard to read, because it's written in Russian, in a form of Russian those are called long capitals. And it's very, very hard to read. But anyway, what it says is Saint Michael, the Archangel. Not exactly in that sequence, but that's what it says. So, what are we looking at? So, Michael, there are several things he's holding. There's and it's hard to see, but above his head, there's an arch. That's the rainbow, and it symbolizes his covenant with God. So what's going on here? So, well, okay, he's holding in one hand the trumpet, which of the trumpet of judgment, and also attached there's a censer way out to the right, and in his left in his left hand he's holding the trumpet, in his right hand he's holding a book, the book of judgment, and this rather slender cruciform, well, cruciform in the sense that the upper end of that lance is shaped like a cross, and it's piercing a demon, that's that black figure at the bottom, and that turbulent sea represents sin. And sinking in the sin is that evil city of Babylon. And now, this is not the only way that Saint Michael, the archangel, is represented, but in the ones that do represent him mounted like that, the horse, for some reason, is red. So, Saint Michael, the archangel, and if you see icons that show somebody on a horse like this, it depends on what's down below. If it's St. Michael down below, you're going to have the evil city of Babylon sinking in the sea of sin, and the lance piercing this demon. But if that's not down at the bottom, you're looking at St. George. Anyway, this is the Archangel Michael in one kind of representation. This is not a very large icon, but anyway, that is what that is. And that's the last of the icons. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I stopped talking before you stopped listening.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was such a wonderful presentation. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. So I do know that we have at least one question in the chat. Let me open the chat up and see. And I'd also like to open the floor up to anybody who has any questions right now to just type your questions into the chat, and we'd love to answer them. So the first question that I'll relay to you, Bill, from the chat room is, on the diocese icon, what is the content of the texts that the figures are holding? So
I was hoping no one would ask that. I don't know. I can't read it. I don't even know what language it is. But it just happens to be there, and I'm very sorry, but I don't know what that is. I suppose it's, scripture that has to do with the subject. That's all I can say. I'm very sorry. I do not know.
That's okay. Thank you, Bill. Let's see. Teresa says thank you, and she'll be so happy when we can come back in person. And she's wondering if there is any date for in person yet. I don't think at this moment we have a date to announce for in person officially yet, but hopefully soon. So I'm sorry that I can't answer that question exactly, but soon is the answer that I can give right now, and we're very hopeful. So if there are, I just want to give another opportunity for anybody to either unmute themselves. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask Bill a question yourself, or you can type them into the chat and I can relay them for you. And let me just quickly make sure we have no questions over on Facebook.
Yeah, hi, this is, my name is Julia, and I'm just curious if Bill could speak a little bit about how did he get interested. How does one get interested in iconography? What was your experience?
Well, in my case, I had seen icons before. As a matter of fact, but I was, of course, not familiar with them in any particular detail until uh, there are, I think this icon collection here, it was the first one on the West Coast, but there are collections on the East Coast. Marjorie Motherwell, I can't even say it. Marjorie Motherwell, I can't, for goodness sakes, I can't even read my own writing. Marjorie Merriweather Post at Hillwood Museum in Washington. There's a collection of icons there. But, and as a matter of fact, when I went to see that, I happened to know the docent personally. But my interest really is that when I first saw these icons, when I became a trainee at the Timken, I'm interested in languages. I have dictionaries in 17 languages. I can read with varying degrees of proficiency 8 languages. And I was really curious about the writing on the icons. What does it say? And I did the same thing about some of these Japanese prints. They have one thing that makes them similar to icons is that these hokusai prints, for example, it says what it is. It's written on there in Japanese. Oh, what does it say? What does it say? And but anyway, my main interest at first was, what does it say? And of course, I can't read all of it. If you look at all the writing on the St. Michael icon, I can't read that. But anyway, the basic stuff is accessible. That's what got me started. Was see, icons can be kind of offsetting because they look stiff. They're not what we expect to see. They look funny. Why do they look like that? And especially when you think about the fact that, I mean, the Eastern Church. What about the tradition of Greek art and stuff? So, well, they thought that was pagan. They rejected that as pagan. But anyway, I think that icons, if you can figure out what it is that you're looking at and what it represents, then it makes them more accessible. And so I find them very interesting. But mainly, as I say, my interest was I'm interested in languages, and I just dying to know, what does it say? What does it say? Now, about that, there's a book by Aldous Huxley called Texts and Pretexts. And in it, he says, if you're really interested in poetry, you should read some in the original. I think, oh my goodness, I couldn't do that. I said, well, now, wait a minute, wait. Take haiku, for example. Haiku only had 17 syllables. I mean, how much Japanese would you have to learn to do just one? In other words, the same thing here. You don't need to be a Greek scholar or a Russian scholar. It helps to know or have a familiarity with the Russian alphabet and the Greek alphabet. But aside from that, you don't need to be an expert in Greek or Russian to get at least the basics, of these monograms and things that are typically seen on these icons, especially with the Mother of God and Jesus. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Thanks for indulging me in this. Yeah, it's amazing. Languages definitely could be a way of just discovering new things, and the icons are just so beautiful. They are very beautiful aesthetically. So yeah, I enjoyed my visit to Timken Museum a few years ago, and I can't wait to actually visit again and see them. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you so much for that, Julia. Thank you for asking a question. We have one more question coming from Facebook Live for you, Bill, wondering what the color of the celestial animal symbolizes, if you know.
I don't know. I have never read anything that explains that. It's just the way they do it. The other icons of mounted figures like St. George, and there's also St. Demetrius, are shown that way. Their horses don't happen to be red. So a flame with the spirit, I don't know. I guess that might be it. A flame with the spirit, let's say. A flame with the spirit of God fighting demons and evil. That may not be the answer, but that's what I would say. It represents that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bill. Well, if there are no other questions, then feel free to, ask any last minute questions that you have right now. But I'd like to just thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you again, Bill, so much for this presentation and for sharing your knowledge with us. And I want to remind everybody that if you enjoyed this presentation, we have another presentation next Thursday, as we have every Thursday at 11 a.m. And that presentation is entitled The Men of the Timken, 3 Centuries of Masculine Presence. So if you'd like to join us for that, again, it's at 11 a.m. next Thursday. So thank you so much, everybody. Finally, again, thank you, Bill. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Okay. That's it. Okay, I'm going to sign off now, and thank you for advancing these slides. And I'm glad we got them all in. And until the next time, I think I'll be. Did Christina mention that she asked me to do some other presentations on? No, it was after the museum opens, to just do one a month or something.
Oh, that's so exciting. So you'll be staying on.
And she mentioned your name and helping put them together. I had thought of doing one on portraits and another one on landscapes, at the Timken,
That sounds
backed
great.
up with others. So I'll be in touch.
Of course. No, I'd love to help. Yes, send me anything you need, and I'll put it together for you.
Thank you very, very much.
Of course. Okay, bye, Bill.
Bye.